All right, so good evening, everybody. This is Navionics webinar here with Steve Quinn of In-Fisherman, and Steve is going to talk to us about smallmouth bass fishing. I've known Steve for quite some time as a good friend and good fishing partner. So, Steve, thanks for staying up tonight with us and helping out our viewers here learn a little bit about catching smallmouth bass from one of the experts in the country. So I am going to clue it over to you and let everybody know before we do here that we do have at the bottom, if you've got any questions, feel free to click the Q&A or the chat button on anything you have for Steve based on what he's asking or anything that comes up. We usually take the last 15, 20 minutes of the webinar, and I'll read off your questions to Steve, and we have a little Q&A to help you with anything specific. So Steve, without further ado, if you want to share your screen, and then I'm going to go off cam and go mute and let you take it from here.
All right, well, let's do that. All right, cool. Let's see now, where are we?
I'm staying on until you're set up.
All right, there we go. As I told you, this is about the first one of these I've ever done. So here we go. All right. All right.
And then select your PowerPoint.
Right. There we go. Whoops. All right, there it is. Now I'll move this down. Or can I shut that off, right, Paul?
What's that?
Yeah, okay, there we go.
I don't have anything up yet.
Okay, now here we go. All right, play. All right, there we go.
Are you sure? I don't have it yet.
You don't see it?
Nope.
Oh, okay. All right, let's go back. I got it up front. All right, now there I am. Okay.
So there's you. So you click share screen, and then it should pull up whatever you want to share, and then you selected one of them, correct?
All right, here we are. Now, if I share the screen, it's going to cover up this image, however, right?
No, once you share a screen, it'll select whatever you select will pop up on what you want to show.
Oh, okay. All right.
So you'll have your PowerPoint, your image open first. You'll share screen, and then you'll select that image.
All right. So that's in the top. Any share or share.
You've got it. You've got it at your bottom. You've got at the bottom row. You've got share screen. You've got like participants, Q&A, polls, share screen, right? When you on the Zoom.
Let's see. Share screen. Okay.
Yeah. And then select what you want to show.
Well, it doesn't show it on this, but I got the PowerPoint up. Open.
Okay. No, it's not. Did you when you hit share screen? Did you then select the PowerPoint?
No.
There you go.
It doesn't have it on that.
Doesn't have it when you hit share screen as one of the options?
No.
Sorry, everyone, we are experiencing technical difficulties here with the webinar. We'll be back with you shortly. I need one little thing to go.
I've got an avionics webinar, but that is not coming up on the share screen.
That's really odd. I wonder why.
Maybe if I drag it in there.
No, it shouldn't.
Ooh.
I'm going to make you co-host. Let's see if that helps.
Okay.
All right. Try it again now. Let's see if that changes things. I moved you. I upgraded you.
Okay. So yeah.
So share screen.
Share the screen. Okay. Yeah, I know. It's weird. It's got.
Are you still?
All right. Now here it is. I've got it.
Got it, maybe?
I think I've hit it. Double click.
Oh, right. Wait a minute. There we go.
All right, we got her going here. Okay.
All right, so you click on your first slide, and you should be right now. I'm looking at your double click to edit slide. So there we go. All right, Steve Quinn,
Got it
everybody.
rolling. Thank you, sir. All right, well, folks, this is great to chat with you about smallmouth bass. You know, we've gotten through a little of the technologies. You know, I moved to Minnesota in 1988, so I'm not exactly a spring chicken. Back in those days, we used to write our articles on legal pads. So this all new technology is really cool, but it takes a big learning curve for a guy like me. But when I moved to Minnesota in '88, I didn't know it at the time, but I was about to experience the super meteoric rise of smallmouth bass fishing. And it's just been a really, really cool ride to be a part of. You know, I moved from Georgia, and we have fantastic largemouth fishing, very few smallmouth. Although I did grow up catching smallmouth bass in the Saranac River, New York. I caught my first one in about 1959 on a Mep spinner, Saranac River. But been a long time. But Minnesota and the whole northern sector and even out west has experienced a fantastic boom in smallmouth bass fishing. So I thought today we'd talk about, you know, some of the general principles of finding these fish. You know, I've talked with so many great fishermen over the years in my editorial job here and been able to fish some of the really great waters all the way from the Columbia River to the east end of Lake Erie and St. Lawrence River. So it's really interesting and cool stuff out there that's happening all the time. So what's neat is we can, you know, share some of these concepts so quickly. But anyway, let's talk about top to bottom. Because that's an important concept. You know, it's so cool to catch them, but to do so, you really have to first find the fish, of course. That's one of the key principles of the In-Fisherman. The fish, understand the biology of the fish, and then it leads into its location for that season, and then picking a good presentation according to what they're doing out there, right? But just when you get one, of course, that's what makes everybody fall in love with smallmouth bass, because they are so cool, they're so fun, they just fight no matter how big they are. And now they are occupying so many different environments and really, really getting awful big, you know. But the top, middle, bottom concept is something that I picked up on from our old friend Bill Siementhal out in California, and he uses this to break down waterways for those giant largemouth bass that they catch out there in Castaic and Casitas. But the same thing is really true with smallmouth, and it helps you to see and develop patterns as each day goes along. You know, these are very versatile fish. I mean, it's amazing how they can occupy different niches in different types of waterways. And they will ride the top of the water and hit surface baits. They will, you know, cruise the middle ground and eat a lot of suspended prey. And oftentimes they will hug the bottom where they're feeding on things like gobies, which we now have, and abundant crayfish. Of course, it's hard to get away from that at most of our natural lake systems. But depending on the depth of the water, it can make a vast difference in how successful your presentation choice is as the day goes on. So just some concepts to talk about, I thought, for today. It's kind of cool, you know, here we are in midsummer, so we've kind of got a large spectrum of opportunities. They've come off, all the bedding's done. They're really free to feed and move as they wish to in these different waterways. Rivers versus lakes. This is the smallmouth bass evolved as a river species. There were as the glaciers melted, they thrived in those environments, and they still do thrive completely. You know, our office sits right on here on the bank of the Mississippi River, and really one of the great smallmouth fisheries from miles up above here all the way down into Iowa. Fantastic fishing, and many of the small creeks that feed the Mississippi, and then in the giant rivers from St. Lawrence in the east all the way out to the Columbia, you know, that don't seem like rivers, except they've got a lot of current. That's one of the key things that differentiates river smallmouth from lake smallmouth. You know, the key is, of course, anytime you're going to go after these fish is the calendar period. And now here we are in the summer period. These fish are feeding, like I said, but they're also moving a lot in terms of what where they're feeding. They're following bait fish in many systems, whether it be down south in Kentucky Lake, they're feeding on shad. Up at Lake of the Woods, they're running trap lines to hit crayfish, pockets. Rivers flow rate is so important. Lately, we've had a lot of rain, current flows are up. You got to take that into consideration. It's going to push your bass either to feed on the surface if your water is clear and not too deep, or they're going to be on the bottom because that's where they escape the most current, on the bottom or else along the bank where you have current breaks, your wing dams, your fallen trees, your jetties and harbors and that kind of thing, which will be key in the higher flow conditions. Clarity too. You got to look at that in a lake or a river. How far can these fish see, basically? And that's important. I've seen a lake area we've been fishing in with jerk baits in 25 feet of water and catching smallmouth bass that are rising up apparently to eat those baits out of, they're close to the bottom or they may be suspended, but the clarity gives them a lot of vertical movement options that they really take advantage of. I mean, these fish are aggressive. Let me just give you a case in point. Years ago, we had about a 3-pound smallmouth bass in a 1,400-gallon fish tank at In-Fisherman. And that feller was in there, we put him in, there were a couple walleyes, some much bigger largemouth bass, and crappies. Within 3 days, that male smallmouth had them all cowed into a corner. He had them all pushed into a ball, and they weren't going out of there because they are just mean, and they will rule the water column when they get active. So key, and then of course in the lake systems, you got vegetation, which often can play a part in a smallmouth location in the summertime. Certain lakes do, certain lakes don't. But if the more vegetation you have, the more they will associate with that, often because the bait fish are present. And then of course, wind, wind is a big factor on a lake, and it can be detrimental to your presentation. When you get on something like Mille and you got a 20-mile-an-hour wind from the northwest, you're going to be in tough shape. But it also can make the fish active. It makes them less aware of what's going on. They just get more active, and there's bait fish moving around, and they do that. So keys to these different types of water. Anyway, surface options, and everybody loves smallmouth bass fishing topwater, right? And indeed, it is cool. Walking baits are my favorite to find fish in large systems. This is a shot from lax, and boy, they can cover some of those big reef areas or those post-spawn locations where the fish setting up cruising. Some of them are in the mid-water column, and sometimes they'll actually come off a bed and hit a topwater. But you can cover a lot of water with a walking bait, and a lot of fun when they blow up. Poppers, though, they will work on a big water system, but they really score best when you have more of a target-oriented system. Like rivers are ideal. If you can see logs on the bottom or the edge of a wing dam or harbor mouth, giving it that slow twitch, pause cadence with a topwater bait, because you can more or less figure out where the fish are located based on the current, based on the clarity of the water. That popper will do its thing. It's a much smaller spectrum bait. You're not covering a lot of water with it, but you're more or less finessing on that surface bite. Really, really fun. And boy, the blow-ups are awesome. Here's one. This is a deadly river bait. And I don't know that I've caught a lake smallmouth with this, but if you're fishing the Mississippi River in a lot of the more fast-moving rocky pools and not trying to buzz bait, wow, it can be amazing. It's a good way to, especially when that current's running real fast, those fish will get right up on the bank. It seems like they're in no water at all, but you chunk up right to the bank, right on, even onto the first rocks on the shore, and start whining a big white buzzbait. And man, they will absolutely annihilate that lure. It's one of the funnest ways. And this one here, I really like. It's just come out now. It's the new Strike King Swinging Sugar Buzz. And you can see it's a jointed lure there, which means that you're going to have a higher hookup percentage, because the bait's a little deeper in the water with that little swim bait tail like I have on this one. And you're also going to land more because they don't have that leverage to twist. And I don't know what it is about a buzz bait, but both largemouth and smallmouth bass just frequently get off of those. But a good this whole swing and hook concept is a big one that has been growing over the past few years. We're headed to ICAST show next week. I'm sure we're going to see all kind of new innovations in these type of flexible baits that, you know, allow you to, you know, use different hooks, different trailers, and keep your fish pinned on. So a cool deal. And sometimes you use what, you know, something other than white, but not very often, to be honest with you. That's fun though. But then I would say a lot of the presentations that were successful, and some of the key new ones are in this midwater area. And this is particularly true in these big clear lakes where the smallmouth are feeding on bait fish that are in the middle of the water column. The spin bait concept is one that Duo Realis first capitalized on, and really it looks like a little surface bait, propeller bait, two propellers, but they sink. And the first time I saw that, I'm like, is that really going to work? But I'm getting the word out that these things are really the deal in certain situations where you have pelagic smallmouth bass feeding on bait fish in open water. And at times, guys will be able to use side imaging and graph these fish in schools of bait out to the side of the boat and then use these baits. And then it's a do-nothing approach, fishing with 6-pound mono or fluorocarbon, just a very light. It's absolutely a do-nothing approach, like we've seen, you know, from some of the jackal baits that absolutely, you know, do nothing. And seems kind of not like smallmouth usually react to, but definitely something to try. This is a new Rapple one. My son tells me is going to be a hot one for this year. So we'll see. But someplace like the Great Lakes, when they're feeding on some of the alewives, even perch on something like a Cayuga or Oneida in New York, that could be a good factor where you have that water clarity where the fish are going to be able to see that bait from at least 4 or 5 feet, maybe 6 or 8 is going to be the better. You know, murky water, it's just not going to be a factor. In fact, the murkier the water is, the very less likely smallmouth bass are to suspend. They want to relate to rock in those conditions, or they want to relate to wood, but rock's their number one favorite. Or, you know, if it's on shad, then they'll be near the surface, even in warm water. You know, the swim bait. If you watch InFisherman shows a lot, you've seen a lot of stuff about swim baits for every species under the sun, from redfish to pike to bass, largemouth, smallmouth. And certainly it is a very, very versatile bait, so lifelike in its appearance. Just that little wiggle tail. You can run them. There's a little old havoc bait here. But you know, you run the great big baits for other species, but great smallmouth selection in rivers or lakes. You know, where you've got a 3 or 4 foot run through a creek, you know, these things are great. They'll just hit it lightly, and you've got an open hook, you've got them right away. Deeper water, you can count them down, really cover the entire water column when those fish are somewhere above the bottom and not feeding on the surface either. And some days they're just not on top. If it's not bait high, they won't be up. They'll be somewhere down looking for baitfish schools, moving around. And this bait covers a lot of water, one of the really key features of a swim bait. All right, well, early season, this was my first big smallie of the year. Actually in March down at Lake Pepin, I was trying out the new Berkbeak cutter. And, you know, fish was at 9, 10 feet, but bait get down about 3, 4 feet. But early in the season, that there's something about the jerk bait that you cannot beat. Now this is a lake, well, a river that's like a lake, but you know, work very well in natural lakes. But in rivers too, you know, if you use bright colors, you get those smallmouth hitting them. And the water this day was 39 degrees Fahrenheit, all the way into the high 40s. A jerk bait is a lot of fun to fish. You know, the only thing, it's got a lot of hooks on it. It's a little bit difficult to release them, but boy, they do eat them up. And the colder it is, of course, the slower you want to work the bait. And you may need to tweak some of these lures now to get that perfect balance. You know, those storm suspend dots and suspend strips are worth their weight in gold. You can adjust a lure, you know, to get it to fall, just drop a little bit or a little bit more nose down can be the key in times. And there's a lot of these jerk baits out there, more all the time, day in, day out. Experimenting with different styles and sizes is real important. Falling in love with any one lure in this category is a big mistake, because from one day to the next, they will switch their preferences for brands. It's funny. And sometimes colors too, but usually natural or else really wild. One year, we were just doing the best with Wonder Bread jerk baits. Lake Erie, like I mentioned, you know, big open water, deep fish, they will come up and eat a bait in clear water. Just an example of as long as that time period is right. And this was early May, and these fish were starting to move in toward the harbor areas and the shore areas where they would spawn, and they were on the jerk baits big time. Rattle baits, you know, for years we fished them and became known as the largemouth selection, the Bill Lewis rattle trap. But for smallmouth bass, I can't say who really came up with the concept of ripping and dropping and jigging these lures instead of steadily winding them like we do in grass beds for largemouth. But boy, does it ever work when you get on this time.
I think that was Jeff Simpson. At least that's what he told me.
Right, could be. But it's certainly something that people are catching up on. And the more they're fishing them that way, the more fish they're catching. And not just smallmouth, but even some deep open structure largemouth bass and a lot of walleyes too. Because it's that natural rip drop, you know, where the fish are feeding off the bottom, but they see it fall. It looks like a sick bait fish, and then the upper rip, and then bang, you got a fish. As soon as it starts, you know, to come up off the bottom, they're attacking these baits. The rip and wrap has caught a million fish, and the rattling five and many of the others are great. And really, you want them that are shaped more like the oval style of rattle bait versus the classical elongated Bill Lewis one, because it just has that nicer fall. Striking red eye shad's another one that has a nice fall rate, and that rounder body style that lends itself well to the fall. And you don't want it to spin out too bad. But something really to try when the fish are somewhere out there and you're hunting in open water. The grub. This is another of my favorite, and of all lures, you know, I may have caught more smallmouth on grubs than anything else over the years. And it's a perfect bait when you're combing relatively shallow areas, say 4 to 8 or 9 feet. You know, you can adjust the weight of your jig head, you know, that 5-inch kaolin, you know, year in and year out. Hard to beat. They've got 100 and something colors. Sometimes it matters, you know, usually green pumpkin is hard to beat, maybe a little purple in there, but that's what this one is. Beautiful bait. There's just something mesmerizing about that tail. It kind of reminds me really of when I grew up and we used to fish them at spinners, and there's just that flashing, steady beat of that spinner. And now here you have this grub with a little twister tail. It's not very exciting and it's not erratic, but boy, they will eat it up, particularly in natural lakes. But if rivers get clear, you can do well with it also. Wacky Rig. This is one that's really fun. I mean, here's a cool one, the 4-legged wacky. But when you have fish located like on a rock pile or at the base of a drop, that Wacky Rig, when they're somewhere in between or on the break, on the fall, throw that wacky out there and it just subtly goes down. You know, you want it falling past their nose. They cannot resist it. They'll either hit it as it drops, or as soon as it lands, they'll pounce just like a cat. Boom. And you will, you know, you fish them on light line and then you have a battle on your hands. But a cool bait. impounded river sections is really effective, and lake humps, my favorite place to fish the wacky baits, like, you know, this one. Swim jig. This is a cool swim jig. You know, it's not your classic, but boy, the smallmouth love it. You don't have to worry about having a trailer that can get torn up. They just looks like a minnow that's going through that midwater section of the lake. And that's where these fish suspend. You can cast it out, drop it into that 10-foot range, and just slowly wind it in or snap, pop that a little bit. And boy, they just as soon as they touch it, they're hooked. But a cool option. There's a lot of different ones from these custom jig tires that are beautiful. Here's one that's come out too, talking about jigs, is these Marabou jigs. And I'm not any expert at this, but a lot of my friends have been telling me, especially fishing up north, but even in these cold water areas where you got the, like Green Bay and Sturgeon Bay, that black Marabou jig is absolutely amazing. You got to rig your tackle so that you can really hurl it. This is only a 16th ounce lure. It's a little lure and a big bass. It's almost 6 pounds. But they will just, you know, you slowly wind it along. There's nothing to the presentation. I've talked to a lot of guys, and something, if you're, you know, Minnesota, sometimes it's hard to get out real early and fish this presentation, but on the Great Lakes systems or in the West, in Canada, like on Rainy, where you have early season bass fishing, really a cool deal. And guys are really winning a lot of money with these black. It's just black, or maybe purple, but just slowly wind it in. Get a long rod with super light braid, you know, 6-pound braid, which you can really throw, and a fluoro, and just work it over those pre-spawn areas where the fish are starting to stage. So I'd like to have a trip next spring and do a little more experimentation with that. Chatterbait, you know, this is one that's just a no-brainer, but is it ever deadly? When they get on the chatterbait smallmouth, it's lights out. Not always, but it's just got such that crazy erratic action. And here again is this new chatterbait Freedom, which has a free swinging hook on it. New adaptation of the classic Z-Man chatterbait from Freedom Lures that has a loose hook. You can actually adjust the different hooks that you use in this bait to match, you know, whether you want a, you know, big swim bait style trailer, or, you know, more classic grub, or even a double tail sometimes is all you want. You have to read the mindset of the fish, but give them a shot. You know, some days they'll strike out, but when they're on it, it's great. It's really, you catch big ones with it. And of course, the umbrella rig. What should I say? Some call it cheating. I call it fun. Fantastic lure when these fish get offshore and they're feeding on bait. In our area, it's generally the shad systems, Mississippi River and such. Boy, you could try drop shots and jerk baits. You throw this monstrosity in. It's one after another. Really cool. It just imitates a school of fish, of course. Everybody knows that the allure, and they've gone out of, you know, popularity a little bit because of the tournaments, the major, you know, pro tournaments, you know, banning their use, but it hasn't hurt their efficiency one bit. Of course, the tube. This is another one, the classic bottom bait. And when the fish are on the bottom, man, a tube bait with an open hook jig, if you can get away with that, you'll catch them. Here's Lake Erie, Mille. It's deadly all through this midsummer into fall period. That open hook jig, it's got a little more dicey where you have really thick zebra mussels that tend to lose some more baits, but it's just so easy to set the hook with that versus on a Texas rig, particularly if you have a long line out when you're really working some of that deeper structure in that 14 to 18 foot range off some humps and deep rock breaks. But the old tube is a wonderful lure. Shaky Head. This is one that's a very overlooked for smallmouth bass, but same as it's a lure for largemouth. You get a little jig head and a little subtle worm. Drop that on structure. You know, oftentimes you'll mark fish in a reservoir system. This was actually down at Bull Shoals not too long ago, and see fish on structure. work it slowly with that, you know, eighth ounce shaky will let you fish in 18, 20 feet of water easily. Get those fish when they're, you know, coming in and coming out on the bottom. They want to be on the bottom oftentimes. Drop shot, of course, this is something that, you know, you would really call a bottom bait, I think, although it's a slightly suspended if you keep it up and jig it. But I consider it a bottom bait. I like to pitch it out and let it drop, and then I think it's a subtle fall of that unweighted lure that really gets these fish going. Because I don't dance it, I don't pop it. I know some folks do, but throw it out there, drop it, you pull up, and there's a fish. It's just amazing. Here's a monster from Erie, but I was on the Mississippi River down Little Falls last week, and they're eating up a drop shot. It's cool if they're on those ledges in that 10-foot range. You can just really work it very efficiently along, especially if the fish are a little finicky. You know, if you can get away with the faster moving bait, fine, but oftentimes they're one a little, you know, this midsummer period, especially, you know, it gets that dog day period. Drop shot's always the way to catch some fish. Variety of baits, and most of them have a real subtle action. That's part of the allure. It's not an aggressive presentation. You can wacky rig, you can fish any of these little twitch type baits, you know, your dream shot, twitch tail minnow, simple to rig, deadly effective. Lake Erie, I've done fantastic all through the summer and fall period, working those 25-foot reefs with a drop shot. You mark fish. First, you want to mark fish, make sure they're there, and then you can work them with a drop shot. You know, you got to experiment only with the distance from the hook to the sinker, but generally, if they're bottom-oriented fish, when usually on rock ridges and reefs, short one, 8 inches. Hair jig. Now, as the water gets colder, you're not going to hardly be a fox hair or other type of hair jig for smallmouth bass. A 1/4 ounce is your magic bait. I like a small crawfish on there. Bert's Arctic Fox is just amazing stuff. Wonderful lure as the water gets into that low 40-degree range. When you can have they start to get off the crank, you may still catch some with a tube or a small football jig, but boy, a hair jig, the action of this jig. In fact, we picked up this bait here. See if I can show it to you in front of the camera. This fur is so fine and subtle that any bit of current causes it to just barely rustle. Beautiful lure and just fantastic cold water bait. And a crankbait. You know, I consider a crankbait a bottom bait. I like to work bottom with it. At times you can do well in the mid column, but the more you can bang and hit bottom, of course, that's it. And so great fall option for sure in your lakes, rivers, or reservoirs, really, as long as they're in that reachable range, which now is out to, you know, 20 plus feet with some of these baits. But for me, about smallmouth won't bite a really big bait. About as big as a DT16 is about as big as they go in my experience. Blade bait too. This is another cold water option in deep water systems where they're going to be out in that 25, 30-foot range, and you can really work the bottom and rip and pop this. Even if the water's cold, they will hit one of these blades. The deadly Ned. I had to end with this. This is something that came about through our dear field editor, Ned Kitty. Over the years, he's evolved these techniques of super ultra finesse. And this Ned Rig is gotten just absolutely huge. I've already seen several special rods coming out to fish the Ned Rig. And, you know, if you ever need some bites, if you're lacking a limit of fish, tie on one of these little things with a 16th or even a 20th ounce shroom head and this little Elastec stuff. If you haven't fished Elastec and this Z-Man stuff, it is amazing. It's super stretchy. You know, look at that. That's little 3.5-inch lure. It stretches out. But not only that, not only is it durable, it's also very buoyant. So when your bait falls, it's going to stand, you know, straight up like that on the bottom. Super alluring for largemouth and smallmouth both. Boy, the Ned's just amazing. It's like a magic at times. So anyway, folks, smallmouth bass, gosh, gotta love them. This is my big boy from Erie a number of years ago now, and I love it. It's just fantastic. Get out there and enjoy these beautiful fish. Get them back in the water, take a quick photos, and enjoy it. Really, there's nothing better in these summer months, covering water if you can get them on topwater. But remember the concepts of figuring out where they are in the water column if you're on a lake or a river, and you'll really have a lot of fun and catch a lot of fish. So thank you very much. And with that, we have some, if any questions come through.
Yep, we got a few for you, Steve. And if there's more, again, click on the bottom on the Q&A, and that'll pop up on my screen here. Brian wants to know, what do you feel is the best small lake bass or best place in the country to catch smallmouth bass for sizes and numbers?
Okay, that's a very good question. But I'm going to maybe slightly biased here, but I'm going to pick my old local pond right now of Mille for numbers and size, boosting it above Lake Erie. I know Simcoe has a great reputation, but they're tricky and hard to catch, and it's kind of a fall deal. Mille is year-round. June, if you're coming from for a trip from elsewhere, and we were out talking to folks that had come up from Arkansas, Missouri, other places, Alabama, let's talk to Mille, they could not believe the fish. They never catch fish like these. These fish are commonly running 4 and 5.5, and often well over 6 pounds. Just huge. Erie's great fishery, but it's a little trickier now, and the size is a little bit down. So I'd vote for Mille. Come on over.
Okay, actually, I'm going to jump to another one that mentions Mille. Can you talk a little bit about using hair jigs on Mille?
Well, I have some folks, some friends that have told me that when you get out there, and it's gotten a reputation as an early season cold water bait, but they are able to find and catch big smallmouth bass by just working a 16th, like a VMC black Marabou jig over those deeper reefs. You got to move real slowly. So it's got some effectiveness that I'm going to have to experiment with that presentation. It's a real do nothing. But boy, there's something about that little black bait. Maybe it imitates a leech or that's just got them going. Something to definitely try if you're got a nice, relatively calm day where you can really, really effectively work that light lure.
On your topwater baits, you'd mentioned a walking bait. Is that your favorite topwater bait? And if so, what manufacturer is it?
Boy, I fish them all. As an editor here at the magazine, I try to test them and pick out favorites for different situations. That's a new storm bait there, and certainly it's a great bait, that Rashi Topwater. Super big. It's over 3/4 ounce, I think, and really effective. But the old spooks, down in the Mississippi, we fish the wing dams in the fall, and that one knocker spook. But really, I do have a whole box full of different ones. Sometimes the size too can be a factor. I mean, make the note of that. I've seen situations where you can see the bass are busting on top. This is like Arkansas reservoirs, we have smallmouth, and they're very finicky. I had to go to a 3-inch, the little Zara puppy, little tiny bait, clear, because then you fool them. They're on a specific size range. So really, you want to have a good variety of lures. There's a lot of them out there, different sizes too. Certainly, the Super Spook Junior, day in and out is a good one to have too.
What is your personal biggest smallmouth?
Well, it was actually that one I showed in the last slide there. It weighed 7 pound, 5 ounce.
Damn, that's a monster.
That was a fish.
Where was that? Where did you say that one was caught?
Excuse me?
Where did you say that one was caught?
That was on Lake Erie.
That is a
Any day.
stud.
Yeah.
That is a stud. Jim wants to know, in general, what is your favorite smallmouth color on a bait?
Okay, I'm gonna say pick one. I would say a green pumpkin, and I'll often daub it up a little bit with chartreuse on the tip of the tail, with spike it. The murkier the water, the more chartreuse you want on the tail. You know, sometimes in Mille I'll even get just a little bit, and it's pretty clear now. But if you're in Kentucky Lake or the Tennessee River, a good half of the tail of, say, a grub or something, you can have chartreuse.
On your prop bait, is that work similar to a popper, and is that more of a lake or river bait?
On the true prop bait, I consider that a lake bait. And although I will say that the skeeter prop is probably a very good one. It's a subtle river bait when the rivers get very clear. It's got a little chirp chirp to it. It's not a big throw water lure like they use in Florida, like a devil's horse, which is great for largemouth in Florida waters. But it's a subtle pop up, when they may not be quite as active to hit a popper. That can be a good bait. Now, the spin bait is just a really neat phenomenon. So I'm looking for some really good. We're actually researching for an article in next year's Bass Guide about this whole spin bait system, or this suspended spin baits for suspended bass.
All right. Carl wants to know, is speed a factor when fishing middle water baits?
Good question. Yes, it can be, definitely. Smallmouth bass, they got great eyesight, particularly in clear water. Sometimes they won't hit a swim bait because they can come up and they see, well, it looks pretty good, but it's just too steady. It's too slow. So that's when you want to go to something like a deep jerk bait and just whack, 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 whack. And then you'll fool them, and they'll kind of react because they're so reactive, like I mentioned. They're real aggressive fish when they get feeding. So you definitely something. Yeah, if you're not scoring on something, it doesn't mean the fish aren't there. Do experiment with different styles, and some of these deep jerk baits are really cool. That new deep Rapala shadow wrap. Strike King's got a new deep one too. They can get down into that 9-10 foot range. And often that's where those smallmouth are suspended. They're not really, really deep. In a 30-foot area, they're not in 20, but they'll be up toward the surface looking for bait fish.
Ross says all he keeps catching is carp. Is canned corn still a good bait for smallmouth?
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to get around carp for corns. I once talked to a guy, and he had actually caught a smallmouth bass on a freshwater mussel he took out of the shell, and he was Carolina rigging it. So, I mean, they are pretty omnivorous, but corn, I think they're generally not vegetarians, though.
No, I just like this because Ross can't reply, or at least he's texting me, so I'm going to have some fun with him while I can. So you got to take a little break while we're jumping in between questions. Let me see what else I got here. Here we go. As far as gobies, is the tube the best bait for it? And also, do you see gobies as positive or negative on an impact in fisheries? That's a question.
Right. Yeah. The tube overall is a really great imitation. What we did initially was use as big a football head as we could stuff in there to give it that fat-headed appearance. There's a few cool lures. I just got my hands on some of these new live target ones, and they are just gorgeous. They're realistic, beautiful looking patterns of the gobies, and they're well weighted to work that bottom area. So I think they'll be effective as well. They cost a little more than a tube, but I think they're going to work well. But day in and day out, boy, it's hard to get past that tube with an interior jig head. The live target too, they've got an open hook, so you don't have to worry if you have a lot of line out. And often, if you're working those deeper reefs, you want a lot of line. You got to really make a long cast or and initiate some kind of a drift in your presentation to keep your line low and keep the bait on the bottom.
Okay, now Mike wants to know any suggestions on fishing smallmouth through the ice.
Well, to be honest with you, I have never caught one, but I know a lot of friends have gone to Chequamegon Bay, and a couple of guides there actually will guide for smallmouth bass through the ice. You know, they get in these deep wintering areas, and that's what they're doing. They're not really feeding, but they will bite on certain days, particularly maybe the milder days. You can get them to bite. Lake of the Woods, some of the biologists have found pockets of, hundreds of smallmouth bass stacked all in. And they're kind of leery that for people to go fish them because, if it's a cold day, you can have damage to the fish being on the ice, especially if guys are pulling up, a couple dozen smallmouth. That's usually where you're going to get them is those winter zones that are probably in that 18 to 25 foot holes. In the South Dakota lakes, however, I'm told that sometimes they start actually moving and more likely to be feeding in the more of the flat areas in that 15 to 18, the way largemouths do. You put down an underwater camera and you see largemouths swim around, and they will bite some small or even sometimes big lures. Smallmouth seem more into the real almost semi-hibernation mode overall, but they can be caught.
All right, I've got one more here from Jim that says, have you ever fished Pickwick? And if so, how do you target the smallmouth on Pickwick?
Okay, I love Pickwick. Really cool lake. And I've done it two ways. First pattern is up toward the dam, or either in those little side channel pockets on the it'd be the north side there, where they will get and they're pre-spawn fish moving around in the pockets, or they're feeding on shad right in the fast water of the tail race. And the swim bait is just really, really deadly. At times in the slack pockets, you can get them on a jerk bait too, with that water in the upper 40s. Later on, you've got to look for the little key current breaks, and it's a hard deal. But you want to see the edge of where a pocket water comes into the main channel, and usually in about that 10 to 12 foot range. They range deep on the Tennessee River at times, and drifting a tube bait, swim bait. Usually you're in that little bit deeper water. At times, however, they'll come up where you have more of a fast water break on the tail out of an island or something like that. Those are areas where they'll definitely be looking. There's so many largemouth. At times you'll catch them both in the same spots. Used to be smallmouth dominated down there, but now there's a lot of really big largemouth. But those are the keys. They're usually closer to current than the largemouths.
All right. Well, on that note, Steve, that was the last of our questions for the night. I very much appreciate you staying at or coming back to the office, I should say, later to help out. For anybody that wants to revisit this webinar, we will have it on the Navionics website under our webinar hot link. Steve, I'll also shoot you a copy as well. And
okay.
Of course, anywhere you want to post it on InFish or Facebook, whatever you'd like to do, feel free to do so. So again, thank you, Steve. Really appreciate it. And I enjoyed watching as well.
Well, very good, Paul. All right. Well, thanks very much. We'll see you in Florida next week.
Yep. I'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Yep. Bye now.